Drift Calloway buried his son on a Tuesday morning in April alone with no one standing beside him, not because no one knew, because he had not told anyone. He dug the hole himself in the hard red earth behind the barn 3 feet from where Margaret was buried. He worked through the night before by lantern light because he could not sleep and because there was nothing else left to do with his hands. When it was finished, he stood at the edge of the grave with a hat in his hands and looked at the small wooden cross he had made from fence rails, and he said nothing. There were no words. He had used all of them up on Margaret the year before, and they had not helped then either. That was 4 years ago. He still did not know if burying the boy alone had been the right thing. Some mornings he thought it was the only honest choice he had made in years. No performance. No borrowed comfort from people who would go home afterward and forget. Just the two of them, the way it had been toward the end, when it was always just the two of them. Other mornings he thought it was the cruelest thing a man could do to himself to stand at the edge of something that large and refuse every hand that might have steadied him. He never resolved it. He had stopped trying. The trough on the south fence line had been leaking since March. He knew the exact board that had split, could picture it without walking out to look. He had replaced that same board twice in the past 5 years, and each time the wood warped again in the summer heat, and each time he replaced it, and that was simply how things were. He kept a stack of cut boards behind the barn for exactly this purpose. He had not gone out to replace it yet this season, not because he lacked the time. He had nothing but time, but because the walk out to that fence line past the spot where the keg roan had collapsed, where Tommy had been required a particular kind of steadiness that some mornings he simply did not have. He had learned to wait for the steadier mornings. This was not one of them. Drift stood at the kitchen window in the early gray of 6 o'clock drinking coffee that had gone lukewarm, watching the flatland stretch south toward Tucson. The Arizona summer was building again the way it built every year, slow and absolute, like a door being pushed closed from the other side. The heat did not arrive in Arizona so much as it returned like something that had only been resting, and when it came back to everything it had left behind. The 3rd year of drought. The grass in the south pasture had gone to brown straw by May. He had moved the cattle north to the creek pasture, but the creek was running shallow, and by August it would be a question. Everything in this country came down to water. Where it was going, who had claim to it. He set the coffee cup down and looked at the corner of the room. The hat was still there. Tommy's hat, a child's hat, brown felt with a dented crown, hung on the same nail where Tommy had put it the morning of the accident. He had climbed the storage keg roof because a cat had gotten up there and was stuck, which was exactly the kind of thing Tommy would do, the kind of thing that required no logic, only a 9-year-old's certainty that the situation needed handling. The roof had been weakening for 2 seasons. Drift had known it. He had told himself he would get to it before winter. He had not gotten to it before winter. He did not move the hat. He did not move toward it or away from it or acknowledge it in any practical way. He simply knew it was there the way a man knows where his wounds are without having to look at them. Some furniture in a house is made of wood, and some is made of grief, and the grief kind is harder to replace. He rinsed the cup, set it on the rack, and went outside to start the morning. The cattle needed water hauled to the north pasture. The fence on the east property line needed checking after the wind 2 nights ago. The leaking trough on the south line still waited for the steadier morning that had not yet arrived. He moved through the work the way he had moved through 4 years of mornings, with the economy of a man who has reduced his life to what is necessary and let everything else go. He did not speak to anyone. He had not spoken to anyone in 4 days since Walt Gibney from the eastern property had stopped by to share news about a sale in town. Walt was a good neighbor in the way that some people are good neighbors without being much else, and Drift appreciated his predictability. Walt would come. Walt would tell him things. Walt would go. Nothing was required of Drift except to listen and nod, and he had enough left in him for that. It was around 4 in the afternoon, when the light was beginning to angle low and gold across the flats, that the horse came. He heard it before he saw it. The wrong rhythm. Not the steady 4-beat of a horse at work. Something broken too fast, driven by something beyond simple speed. He straightened up from the fence post he was checking and turned west, and the horse came out of the dust at a dead run, an Appaloosa running bareback. No rider eyes, white-rimmed and wild. It blew past the fence line close enough that Drift could feel the heat off its flank, and it kept going south without slowing. He stood for a moment looking at the direction it had come from. There was blood on its neck. Not a wound, he thought. Transfer. Something had bled on this horse, not the horse itself, something that had been on its back and was no longer there. He went to the barn and took his own horse, a gray quarter horse named Abel, steady and sensible in the way that good working horses are sensible, not brave, just unimpressed by most things. He rode west at a trot, watching the ground, watching the distance. He almost missed her. She was moving slowly enough that at first, in the failing light and the dust haze, he took her for a figure walking along the property edge. Someone from the Navarro spread, maybe someone whose horse had thrown them. Then he saw the bare feet. The way she was walking, not the walk of someone heading somewhere, but the walk of someone calculating exactly how many more steps they had in them and deciding to use all of them. She was Apache by the cut of her dress and the quality of her stillness when she realized he had seen her. She stopped. She did not flinch. She did not step back. She simply stopped walking and looked at him, and her eyes were dark and precise, in a face marked by road dust and exhaustion, and something that had moved past fear into a kind of flat, functional clarity. Her left arm had a wound on it, not deep, a gash from something sharp bound with a strip torn from the hem of her dress. Her feet were torn from rocks and hard ground. She had been walking since before sunup, he guessed. Maybe longer. He stayed on the horse. He did not reach for the rifle on his saddle. He just looked at her, and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she spoke. Her English was clear and deliberate, with the quality of someone who had learned it as a working language and was not interested in decorating it. "My father was killed 3 days ago. Sheriff Dutton is telling people I did it. I need water. I need you not to put me on the main road, and I need 10 minutes of your time. After that, you can do whatever you decide to do." Drift looked at her for a long moment, not calculating, not suspicious exactly. He was reading something in her face, something he could not have named if someone asked him to some quality of stillness that he recognized from the inside rather than from observation. He turned Abel toward the ranch and said over his shoulder, "Come on." She walked behind him without a word. She did not thank him. He did not expect her to. The kitchen was dim when they came in. He lit the lamp, put water on to boil, and set a cup and a bowl on the table. She sat down and drank 3 cups of water without stopping, without apology. She pressed a wet cloth to the wound on her arm with the practiced efficiency of someone doing a necessary thing, not a dramatic one. He leaned against the far wall with his arms crossed and waited. "Your name," he said. "Naya Coldhaven. My father was Leonard Coldhaven. He led our band north of Broken Ridge for 25 years. Drift nodded once. He had heard the name, not personally, but the way names move through country attached to reputations. A chief who had kept peace in that stretch of territory through 3 different territorial administrations, through disputes and encroachments, and the ongoing pressure from Tucson that never fully let up. A man people talked about with a particular quality of respect, the kind that comes from watching someone do something difficult for a long time without flinching. "Tell me," Drift said. She set the cloth down and folded her hands on the table. What she said next, she said with the flatness of someone reciting facts they have already accepted, all the emotional processing done privately somewhere behind her eyes. What came out now was just the shape of events, precise and without excess. Sheriff Vance Dutton had approached her father 6 times in the past 8 months about the land north of Broken Ridge. The first approaches had been cordial. Offers. Reasonable on the surface, the way things are reasonable when someone assumes you have no alternative. Her father had refused each time. Not with anger, with the calm specificity of a man who understood exactly what was being asked and exactly what the answer was. The land belonged to the band under a territorial agreement signed 8 years ago. It was not for sale. It was not a negotiating position. It was simply true. 4 weeks ago, Dutton had come a final time. He had not made an offer. He had told Leonard Coldhaven that the situation was going to resolve itself one way or another, and that the only question remaining was how much difficulty was required first. Leonard had told him to leave the camp. Dutton had smiled and left. 3 days ago her father was found dead in his tent before sunrise, a single bullet close range while the camp slept. By the time the sun was up, Dutton had ridden in with 4 deputies and a story already built, and the story was that Leonard Coldhaven had been killed by his own daughter in a dispute over leadership of the band, and that Nia Coldhaven was to be considered dangerous and taken into custody. She had run before they could reach her. She had been running since. Drift was quiet for a moment. Outside, the evening wind moved through the gap under the door and the lamp flame leaned one way, then straightened. "Why would Dutton think he can get away with it?" he said. "Because he has before," Nia said, "and because without the land my people have no legal standing to contest anything. He needs the territory commissioner to revoke our claim. To do that he needs us discredited or gone. A dead chief and a daughter who murdered him accomplishes both." Drift thought about that. "There's gold in those ridges," he said. "Not a question." "There has been gold in those ridges for 40 years, she said. "My father knew. He left it alone because he knew what happened the day a white man found out." Her jaw set slightly. "He was right about that." "Dutton will check the surrounding ranches," Drift said. "Yes, not tonight, but soon." "What makes you think I won't hand you over myself?" She looked at him with those flat, exhausted eyes. "Because you didn't ask me to wait outside while you thought about it." Drift straightened up from the wall. He went to the back room and came back with a folded blanket which he set on the chair beside the table. "There's a cot in the back room," he said. "Get some rest. We'll figure out what needs figuring in the morning." She looked at the blanket, then at him with the expression of a person encountering something they have categorized as unlikely. Then she stood, and he caught the smallest hesitation before she steadied herself, just a fraction of a second, one hand touching the table edge gone, before you could point to it, but enough to tell him how close she was to the edge of what she had left. "Thank you," she said. "You don't need to thank me yet," Drift said. "I haven't done anything." She took the blanket and went to the back room. He heard her settle. He went back to the kitchen and poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the table. He sat there for a long time, not thinking about the girl exactly, thinking about the letter. Because before she had finished telling him what had happened to her father, she had mentioned in the way you mention something you assume the other person already knows that Leonard Coldhaven in the days before his death had sent a letter to a rancher north of Tucson, a man named Drift Calloway. Because 8 years ago Drift Calloway had signed his name to the territorial agreement as a civilian witness, one of 3 private citizens who had put their names on the document to confirm it had been made in good faith without coercion in the presence of neutral parties. Leonard had not sent the letter to a lawyer. He had not sent it to the territorial commissioner or the marshal's office or any official with power or standing. He had sent it to the man who had witnessed the agreement and had no stake in the outcome, because a witness with nothing to gain is the hardest kind of witness to discredit. The letter had not arrived yet. She did not know if it would. Drift turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands and thought about the morning 8 years ago when he had ridden to Tucson with Walt Gibney and 2 other ranchers to serve as witnesses for a land agreement between the territorial government and the Coldhaven band. He had done it because he had been asked, and because it had seemed like the right thing to do, and because he had a half-day free and Tucson was not far. He had signed his name with a borrowed pen and ridden home and filed it away with the 100 other small, ordinary things a man does in a life and never returns to. He was thinking about it now. He sat at the kitchen table until the lamp oil ran low, and then he sat in the dark and the Arizona night settled around the house with its particular weight, and somewhere in the direction of Broken Ridge, a coyote said something and was answered by another, and Drift Calloway, who had not had a reason to matter to anyone for 4 years, sat in his kitchen and thought about what it meant that a dead man had remembered his name. He was up before the girl. He had the coffee on and the stove going by the time he heard her moving in the back room. She came out steadier than the night before, still worn, still carrying the kind of exhaustion that one night of sleep does not address. But something behind her eyes had sharpened. She was back inside herself behind whatever walls she kept. He set a cup across the table from him. She sat down and wrapped both hands around it. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The morning came in through the east window, pale and direct, and the kitchen smelled of coffee and the dry grass smell of the Arizona summer beginning to build outside. "My father's journal," she said finally. "He kept one, every night for as long as I can remember. He wrote in it what happened, who came, what was said. He wrote about Dutton, every visit, every threat, every refusal. He wrote about the agreement, about what the land meant, about why he would not sell." "Where is it?" "At the camp, beneath the hearthstone of the main fire, a flat piece of granite larger than the others. He kept things there he did not want Dutton's men to find." Drift looked at her. "Dutton's men have been through the camp already." "Yes, but they did not know about the stone. I am the only one who knew besides my father." She held his gaze without difficulty. "That journal has names, dates, and the exact words Dutton used the last time he came. It would be evidence in a federal court. If someone could get to the camp before Dutton thinks to go back and search more carefully." Drift set his cup down. The camp was 2 hours west by horse through open country that Dutton's men would be moving through today, checking ranches, asking questions. He thought about it the way he thought about practical problems from the outside in, looking at what was there before deciding what to do about it. Before he could answer, there was a knock at the door. Not urgent. 2 measured knocks, the knock of someone who had decided to knock before they arrived, rather than on the way up the steps. Drift went to the door. Hector Vela stood on the porch, a man of 67, with a face that had been through enough Arizona weather that it had stopped changing and simply held everything simultaneously. He wore his usual canvas jacket despite the heat and carried his hat in both hands, which with Hector meant he had come to say something and intended to say it correctly. "Drift," he said. "Hector, come in." Hector stepped into the kitchen, took in the second coffee cup, took in Naya at the table, took in the whole of the situation with the unhurried appraisal of a man who had seen a great deal and had learned to see it accurately. He looked at Naya for a moment, then he looked back at Drift. "Dutton is sending men to the ranches today," he said, "starting with the ones north of town. He'll be at Briggs first, then here." He paused. "He is saying the Cold Haven girl is dangerous. He is saying anyone sheltering her is obstructing county law." "That right," Drift said. "That is what he is saying." Hector's voice carried no judgment on what Drift had or had not done. He was simply reporting weather conditions. "I am not asking you anything, Drift. I am telling you what I heard." "I appreciate that, Hector." Hector nodded once, put his hat back on, and looked across the kitchen at Naya. He held her eyes for a moment with an expression that was old and complicated and not entirely readable. "Your father was a good man," Hector said. "He and I spoke once, maybe 6 years ago, at the Tucson market. He knew about my family's land, the old Vela property east of the creek. He knew how we lost it." Something moved through Hector's face briefly. "He said he was sorry. He meant it. I could tell." He settled his hat. "A man like that deserves better than what happened to him." He turned and walked back to the door. He was on the porch before he stopped and spoke again without turning around. "There is something else," he said. "Something I have carried for 20 years and not known the right moment for." He was quiet a breath. "When I find the right moment, I will tell you. Not today. Today is for other things." He walked down the steps and back across the dry ground toward his property, and the morning sun threw his shadow long behind him, and Drift watched him go. He closed the door and came back to the kitchen. Naya was looking at him steadily. "He knows something," she said. "Hector knows many things," Drift said. "He always has. He waits until the thing he knows is useful." He picked up his hat from the hook. "I'm going to ride to the camp." She was on her feet immediately. "I will go with you." "No." His voice was not harsh, but it was not negotiable. "Dutton's men are looking for you, not for me. A rancher riding west to check his property line is ordinary. A rancher riding with an Apache woman being hunted by the county sheriff is not." He looked at her directly. "You stay here. If anyone comes, anyone wearing a badge or riding in a group, you go out the back and east to the creek. There is a place where the bank drops down and a stand of cottonwood hides it. You wait there." She did not look pleased, but she was her father's daughter, which meant she ran the arithmetic and accepted the result. "The hearthstone is the largest flat stone in the main fire circle," she said. "It angles slightly to the right. You will need to get your fingers under the left edge to lift it." "Understood." "Drift." He stopped with his hand on the doorframe. She looked at him with those precise, exhausted eyes. "Be careful with it. Not because the journal can be replaced. Because it cannot." He put his hat on and stepped out into the morning. He rode west at a steady pace, not hurried, not casual. The land spread around him in the way Arizona land spreads, which is to say that it does not give the impression of going anywhere particular. It simply continues, red and brown and gray-green brush, occasional saguaros standing with their arms raised as if they have been surprised by something, and above everything the sky immense and pale with the early heat. He had not been in this part of the territory for 2 years, not since he had ridden up to check on a stray that had wandered north and been found by a Navarro hand. The country north of Broken Ridge was Apache land. Had been Apache land under the agreement, was open to passage but not to settlement, and Drift had always respected that without much thinking about it, the way you respect what is simply correct. He reached the camp mid-morning. The quiet was the kind that comes after people leave in a hurry. The structures had been disturbed, storage, disrupted fire pits gone through with careless hands. Dutton's men had been thorough in the way that men are thorough when they are looking for something specific and do not find it, which is to say they had turned over what was visible and missed what was not. He tied Abel at the edge of the camp and walked in. The main fire circle was at the center, as Naya had said. He found the hearthstone without difficulty, largest flat stone angled slightly to the right, just as described. He crouched down and got his fingers under the left edge and lifted. The journal was there, wrapped in oiled leather tied with a thin cord, dense and substantial in his hands. He did not open it. He tucked it inside his vest and buttoned the coat over it and stood up. And then from behind him, a voice. "Well now." He went completely still. 2 men. He heard them before he turned. The particular quality of silence that belongs to people who have been patient for a while and are now done being patient. He turned slowly with the deliberate movements of a man who is communicating that he has no intention of doing anything unexpected. Both had rifles. One was short and unremarkable in the way that makes a man hard to describe afterward. The other was taller with professional flat eyes, the eyes of a man who has done this kind of work long enough that he has stopped thinking about it between jobs. "That for the sheriff," the tall one said. "Hand it over." Drift looked at him for a moment. "Don't know what you mean." The tall one moved forward 2 steps. "We've been waiting here since yesterday morning, friend. We saw you take something from under that stone, so let's not do this the long way." Drift thought about his options with the stripped-down practicality of a man who has spent his life solving physical problems. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and too far from the horse. Fighting was not the answer. Talking might be if he chose the right words. "You shoot me," Drift said. "You've got a dead rancher on Apache treaty land. That's a federal matter. That's paperwork and inquiries that Dutton specifically does not want right now." He kept his voice level, watching the tall man's hands. "So you're not going to shoot me, which means you're going to take me to Dutton, which means Dutton gets to ask me what I know and who I've talked to, which might be useful to him." He let that sit. "So there's no reason we can't all ride in civil." The 2 men looked at each other with the body language of people whose instructions did not quite cover this situation. "Walk to your horse," the tall one said finally. It was not a plan. It was a delay. Drift understood the difference and accepted it. He walked to his horse. They rode him south through the afternoon, 3 hours, 2 rifles across 2 saddles, not talking. The journal sat inside his vest, and he felt its weight against his chest with every step of the horse, dense with 25 years of one man's careful record of what was happening to his people. He thought about Leonard Coldhaven riding in it every night, the discipline of it, the faith that it implied. The belief that if you recorded the truth carefully enough and long enough, the truth would eventually count for something. He thought about a man who sends a letter to a witness he has never met, trusting in that man's name on a piece of paper from 8 years ago, trusting in a stranger's signature. He had forgotten he had signed that paper, forgotten and gone on with his life. And the man who could not afford to forget had remembered for both of them. Dutton's property was larger than Drift's, better kept in the way that things are kept when money is not the question. A long porch, a water tower, 3 hands visible in the yard, a county flag near the barn, the general appearance of accumulated authority. Dutton was on the porch when they rode in. He was a thick man, not tall but wide, with the particular ease of someone accustomed to having space made for him without asking. Gray mustache, pale eyes, a glass of something in his hand. He watched Drift dismount with the expression of a man who has seen most of what the world has to offer and found it adequate. "Calloway," he said. "I'll be damned." Drift said nothing. Dutton came down off the porch with a rolling, unhurried walk and stopped 2 feet from Drift and looked at him with those pale eyes for a long moment. "What were you doing in that camp?" he said. "Checking on a stray." Dutton's expression did not change. He reached out and pressed 2 fingers flat against the front of Drift's vest, slowly feeling the shape of what was underneath. Not grabbing, just feeling. The gesture of a man who already knows the answer and is simply confirming it. "Give it to me," he said quietly. "Don't know what you mean." Dutton's hand moved fast. He grabbed the front of Drift's vest and pulled him close, and when he spoke his voice dropped to something that was not angry, not raised, and worse than both. "I have had a very long week, Calloway. I have a dead chief, a missing girl, and 2 territorial officials asking me questions I have no patience for. I am not going to be patient with a fence rancher who rode into something he does not understand." He released Drift's vest and smoothed it with the same hand, almost gentle. "So, where is the girl?" "Don't know any girl." Dutton looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned to the tall gunman and said, "Check him." The man stepped forward and found the journal inside the vest and handed it to Dutton. Dutton unwrapped the leather, opened to the first page, and read in silence for half a minute. His expression did not change. He closed it and held it at his side and looked at Drift with those calculating pale eyes. "You read any of this?" "Some of it." "Then you know what it is." "I reckon I do." Dutton nodded slowly, turned, and walked back toward the porch. He stopped with 1 foot on the first step and did not turn around. "There is a version of this," Dutton said, "where you go back to your ranch and forget the last 24 hours happened. The girl gets found. This journal disappears. Life continues." A pause. "That is one version." "What's the other?" Drift said. Dutton turned. The smile was gone. What was underneath it was not angry and not theatrical. It was simply the face of a man who had made a decision. "Bring him inside," he said, "and send 2 men to the Calloway ranch." Drift did not react to that. He kept his face empty and let himself be walked through the front door and into the dim interior of a house that smelled of tobacco and money and something underneath both that he could not immediately name. It took him until they pushed him into the chair in the front room to identify it. Gunpowder. Old gunpowder worked into the walls over years, not from a single incident, from repetition. The smell of a place where violence had been planned so many times it had stopped being a decision and become a habit. He sat in the chair and looked at Dutton across the table where the journal now sat like a card that had been played. And he thought about the letter that had not yet arrived, about the name Leonard Coldhaven had trusted enough to write on an envelope and send toward a man on a ranch who had until yesterday forgotten he had ever mattered to anyone. He thought about a 9-year-old boy who had climbed a keg roof to help a stuck cat. He thought about what it would mean to choose for once not to be too late. He looked at Dutton across the table and said nothing, and waited. Outside, through the thick walls of the house, the Arizona afternoon pressed down on everything heavy and merciless and completely indifferent to what happened next. But inside, very quietly, in the place where a man keeps the things he has not yet said out loud, Drift Calloway had already made up his mind. Dutton sat across the table from him with the patience of a man who had learned that patience deployed correctly was more frightening than any raised voice. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He set one in front of Drift. He took the other for himself and leaned back in his chair with the unhurried quality of a man who has nowhere to be, because everywhere already belongs to him. "You are not afraid," Dutton said. He seemed genuinely curious about it. "Most men I bring in here, they are afraid within the first few minutes. It is not a criticism. It is simply what I observe." "Most men you bring in here probably have more to lose," Drift said. Dutton looked at him for a moment. "Wife, children?" "No." "Friends?" "Not particularly." Dutton nodded slowly as if filing something away. He picked up the journal and turned it over in his hands without opening it. "Then what exactly are you doing in that camp, Calloway? Because a man with nothing to lose does not typically ride 2 hours into Apache territory before breakfast on behalf of a woman he has never met." Drift looked at the whiskey glass and did not touch it. "I was curious." "About what?" "About whether a man like you could actually do what you appear to have done. In broad daylight. In this territory. In 1883. He held Dutton's eyes without difficulty. "Turns out the answer is yes." Something moved through Dutton's expression. Not anger. Something quieter and more considered than anger. He set the journal back on the table. "Leonard Coldhaven kept peace in this territory for 25 years, Drift said. "You know what that is worth. You know how many men on both sides of that line are walking around alive today because he was the kind of man who chose not to fight when he could have. He built something." He paused. "And you killed him for a gold claim." "I killed him," Dutton said, with the calm specificity of a man correcting an inaccuracy. And then he stopped, and the room went very still, and both of them heard what he had just said. Dutton's expression did not change. He had the control of a man who had spent years in rooms where control was the only currency that mattered. He simply looked at Drift with those pale eyes for a long moment, and then he stood, picked up the journal, and walked toward the back of the house without another word. The tall gunman came from the left and hit Drift across the back of the head with an open palm. Not hard enough to knock him out, hard enough to make the room tilt on its axis and put white sparks at the edges of his vision. They grabbed his arm and hauled him upright and walked him down the back hallway to a room with no window, a plank floor, a door that locked from the outside. They put him in it. The door closed. The lock turned. Drift sat down on the floor with his back against the wall and let the ringing in his head fade by degrees and thought about what Dutton had just said. Not the words themselves, the fact that he had said them. A man as careful and practiced as Dutton did not make that kind of slip by accident. He made it when he had already decided that the person in front of him was not going to be in a position to repeat what they had heard. He thought about the 2 men Dutton had sent to the ranch. He thought about Naya and the Remington on the kitchen table and the cottonwood stand along the creek bank. He thought about whether she had heard them coming in time, whether she had gotten out the back before they reached the door, whether she was in the cottonwood stand right now, counting riders, counting horses, counting exits the way her father had taught her. He thought about a man who had kept a journal for 25 years and buried it under a hearthstone and written a letter to a witness he had never met. He thought about the keg roof and the cat and the morning in April 4 years ago when he had stood alone at the edge of a hole in the hard red earth. Then he stopped thinking and started listening. The house had sounds. All houses did if you had learned to listen to them. Boots on the board floor told him where the men were. Voices told him how many. The shift in those voices told him when something changed. Boots on the board floor, heavy and unhurried. A door opening and closing at the front. Voices at too low a register to make out words. At some point the sound of horses arriving in the yard, and then the shift in the conversation that happens when news comes in. He pressed his ear to the door. One voice clearly Dutton's, low and controlled but with an edge under it that had not been there before. Then silence. Then maybe 20 minutes later the sound of the lock. The door opened. The tall gunman crouched in front of him with the expression of a man delivering news he does not particularly want to deliver. "Ranch was empty," he said. Something in Drift's chest eased by a fraction. He kept his face without expression. "She was there," the gunman continued. "Signs of it. Things left behind. Food out on the table." He looked at Drift with those flat professional eyes. "But she was gone when they got there. Nobody in the house, nobody in the yard, nobody at the creek." Drift said nothing. The gunman studied him for a moment. "Dutton wants to know where she would have gone. Who else might be sheltering her?" "I already told him I don't know any girl." The gunman was quiet for a moment. He looked at Drift for a moment with something unscheduled in his face, something that had not been part of his instructions for the evening. "Dutton is not patient when things go sideways," he said. "I have been working for him for 3 years. I have watched him deal with men who made things difficult." He paused at the door. "I am not telling you to give her up. I am telling you that you do not fully understand what you are in the middle of." He left. The door closed but did not lock this time, which told Drift either it was an oversight or the gunman had made a small decision on his own. Drift sat in the dark and thought about that. 3 years working for Dutton. The way the man had said it with a particular texture that was not pride and not complaint, the quality of someone describing a duration that has lasted longer than the person originally intended. That was a man who had started down a road without checking where it ended and had been arriving at the destination in small increments ever since. That was something. He filed it away. An hour passed, possibly more. He tracked time by the light under the door, which told him the afternoon was advancing toward evening. He heard more movement in the house, more voices. At some point the sound of a meal being prepared in a room that was not far from where he was, the smell of it coming faintly under the door, and he realized he had not eaten since early morning and that his body was registering this information even if the rest of him had other priorities. Then the footsteps changed. Not the boot-heavy tread of the gunman, lighter, more deliberate, moving down the hallway toward his door with the careful placement of someone who was paying attention to how much noise they were making. The door opened. Dutton stood in the doorway without coming in. The afternoon light was behind him now and his face was in partial shadow, but Drift could see that the calculating quality had shifted. What had replaced it was something older and simpler. The look of a man who has run out of patience and is moving into a different gear. "My man Cole is riding out to check the properties north of the creek," Dutton said. "When he comes back without finding anything, I am going to stop being reasonable." He looked down at Drift on the floor without any particular expression. "Last chance Calloway. Where is she?" Drift looked up at him. "Let me ask you something first." Dutton waited. Leonard Coldhaven kept peace in this territory for 25 years. He chose not to fight when he had reason to fight, not once or twice, but over and over for a generation. You know what it costs a man to make that choice that many times? He held Dutton's eyes. "And you killed him for a gold claim you don't even have legal title to yet." Dutton's expression did not move. "Does that bother you at all?" Drift said. "Even a small amount?" "What bothers me," Dutton said quietly, "is inefficiency." He stepped back from the doorway and closed the door. This time the lock turned. Drift settled back against the wall. He thought about Naya at the creek. He thought about the letter that might or might not have arrived at his ranch by now, sitting on the table or the floor inside the front door, or still in transit, still moving toward a house that currently had no one in it. He thought about Hector Vela, who had said there was something he had carried for 20 years and not known the right moment for. He thought about the particular weight of things that have been waiting. Outside, through the thick walls of the house, the Arizona evening was coming down slow and gold over everything, and somewhere west of the ridge, Naya Coldhaven was alive and moving, and Drift Calloway sat in the dark and waited for the moment when waiting became something else. It came sooner than he expected. The lock turned again, and this time when the door opened it was not the gunman, and it was not Dutton. It was Naya. She stepped through the doorway with her hands at her sides and her face completely still. Behind her, filling the doorway, stood Dutton, and behind Dutton, visible in the hallway, two men with rifles. Drift looked at her. She looked back at him. Her jaw was set in a particular way he had learned to read in the short time he had known her. Not defeat, not panic. Something more interior than either the look of a person who has made a calculation and is committed to it regardless of what it costs. Dutton's voice came from behind her with the flat satisfaction of a man whose patience has been rewarded. "She walked in," he said, 20 minutes ago, right up to the front door." He sounded almost genuinely amused by it. "You want to tell him, or should I?" Naya looked at Drift and spoke to him directly as if Dutton were furniture. "He has Hector Vela," she said. "One of his men picked him up at the property line 2 hours ago. Dutton says he will release him if I come in." Drift stared at her. "You walked into this house," he said, "for Hector Vela." "Hector came to warn you," she said. "He did that because of me." Drift turned to look at Dutton. "Hector is a civilian. He is 67 years old. He has nothing to do with any of this." "He had a wanted fugitive's tracks leading away from his property line," Dutton said. "That makes him involved." He tilted his head slightly. "But I am a reasonable man. I have what I want. Release Briggs Hold. These two send a wire to the territorial office in the morning. Clean and simple." Nothing about it was clean. Drift could see from the smallest shift in Naya's eyes a barely perceptible movement toward the window on the left that she knew it too. She had come in voluntarily to protect an old man she barely knew. That was one kind of calculation. Now she was making another. They were put in a room together. A guard was posted at the door. Dutton was not careless, but he was not as careful as he believed he was. Leaving them together was the first real mistake he had made, and it was the mistake of a man who was tired and had convinced himself the situation was resolved. The room was dark. One small window set high in the wall, enough light from the gap under the door to see shapes. Drift worked at the rope on his wrists immediately. Old habit from a life of working with animals and fencing wire, the ability to find the give in a knot without being able to see it. The knot was competent, but not exceptional. "Hector," he said quietly. "Is he actually here?" "I heard him," Naya said. "A room off the kitchen. He was not hurt. He was angry." A brief pause. "He told the man guarding him that he had been in this territory since before Dutton's father was born, and he intended to be here after Dutton was in the ground. The guard told him to be quiet. Hector did not become quiet." Drift felt the first loop of the rope give. "That sounds right." Silence for a moment. Then Naya said quietly and carefully, as if she were taking inventory, "The guard changes in approximately 2 hours. I counted the men in the yard when they brought me in. 3 outside, 1 at the front, 1 here at our door. The window behind you latches from the inside." A pause. "Cole's horse is the roan tied left of the barn." Drift stopped working at the rope. "You counted them," he said. "My father taught me." Her voice was even. "He said always count. Always know where the doors are. Always know whose horse runs fastest." Another pause, shorter. "I have been counting since I walked through the front door." He worked the last loop free. His hands came apart. He sat still for a moment in the dark, his wrists aching, and thought about Leonard Coldhaven teaching his daughter to count the men in a room before she needed to know the exits before she wanted them. A man who had been preparing for this moment for a long time, who had not lived to see it, but who was present in everything his daughter did. 2 hours, Drift said. "Yes," Naya said. "That is enough time." "The journal," he said. "I know." Her voice did not change. "We cannot leave without it." He moved to her in the dark and found the rope on her wrists and started working. Her hands were steady. She did not pull. She held completely still with the patience of someone who understands that the next 30 seconds matter more than anything that came before them. Outside, somewhere in the house, a door opened and closed. Footsteps on the board floor, getting closer. Drift worked faster. The footsteps slowed outside their door. He had one loop of Naya's rope undone, then two. His fingers moved as quickly as he could make them move without making noise. She did not breathe loudly. She held the kind of stillness that belongs to people who know that a single wrong sound changes everything. The door handle turned. Drift let the rope fall, put his back flat against the wall beside the door frame, hands loose at his sides. In the half-second before the door swung open, he caught Naya's eyes across the dark room, and she read what he needed without a word spoken between them. The guard stepped in, looking at Naya because that is where the problem was supposed to be, that corner, that woman. His eyes went there first, and by the time he registered that the other corner was empty, Drift had one arm around his throat and the other hand over his mouth, and they went down together hard and quiet onto the plank floor. 20 seconds. The man went still, and Drift lowered him carefully and took the belt knife and the sidearm and looked up. Naya had the last loop of rope off her wrists. She was already standing. "Hector is off the kitchen," she said. "Journal is in Dutton's study, front of the house." She looked at him. "Together. We do not know this house." "Together," he agreed. He moved to the door and looked out into the hallway. Empty. The house had the quality of late evening men past the first alertness of their watch and not yet to the sharper edge that comes before midnight. They went left toward the kitchen. Hector Vela was sitting on the floor of the room off the kitchen with his back against the wall and his wrists tied and his face arranged in the expression of a man who has spent several hours being afraid and has come out the other side into something flatter and more durable. Anger mostly. The specific anger of a man who has been underestimated in his own county for 40 years and has grown tired of it. He looked up when the door eased open and his mouth went tight. Drift crouched and cut the rope. Hector flexed his hands slowly, working the feeling back into his fingers. "About time," Hector said at a volume that was lower than his normal voice but still distinctly audible. "Quiet," Drift said. "I have been quiet for 4 hours. I am done being quiet." But he said it at the same low volume, which was the Hector version of cooperation. Drift helped him to his feet. He moved more slowly than he wanted to, the stiffness of hours on a hard floor, but once upright he straightened with the deliberateness of a man refusing to let his body make apologies on his behalf. He looked at Naya. Something moved through his face recognition assessment, and then something else, something older, a different kind of recognition. "You are Leonard's daughter," he said. "Yes." He nodded once slowly. "You have his eyes, the same way of looking at things." He glanced at Drift. "I need to tell you both something. I was going to wait for the right moment, but I have learned tonight that waiting for the right moment is how things stay buried." "Hector," Drift said, "we need to move. This will take 30 seconds. The old man's voice was quiet but absolutely firm. 20 years ago, when Dutton was still a territorial clerk and my family still had the Vela land east of the creek, there was a contract, a land transfer agreement. Dutton drew it up himself. He presented it to my father as a standard county record-keeping document, a survey confirmation, something my father needed to sign to maintain his claim. My father did not read English well. He signed it." Hector's voice did not rise or fall. It simply carried the weight of what it carried. What he signed was a transfer of title, complete and irrevocable, witnessed by 2 other county employees whose names I have never forgotten. The land was Dutton's within 60 days. The kitchen was quiet. Outside the window, the night sounds of the Arizona desert carried on without concern for what was happening inside. "I found out 6 months later," Hector continued. "By then there was nothing to be done through the county office. Dutton owned the county office. The territorial court would have taken years and money my family did not have." He looked at Drift steadily. "But I kept the original contract. The fraudulent one. The one with my father's signature and Dutton's signature and the 2 witnesses. I have kept it for 20 years because I did not know when it would matter, only that it would matter eventually." He reached down toward his boot with the slow deliberateness of a man who has done the same motion 10,000 times. He removed the boot, reached inside, and extracted a folded document wrapped in oilskin no larger than a man's palm. "Dutton has done this before. To my family. To others. And he has done it for 20 years without consequence, because no one has had both the evidence and the reason to use it at the same time. He held the document out. Drift took it. Now someone does, Hector said. He put his boot back on. Drift looked at the document in his hand. Then he looked at Naya. Get him out, Naya said. I will go with you to the study. You should go with Hector. The study is at the front of the house. You do not know which desk, which drawer. I watched them bring the journal in. I know exactly where Dutton put it. She was right, and they both knew she was right, and there was no time to argue about it. He looked at Hector. Can you get to the horses? I have been getting myself places since before you were born. There is a roan tied left of the barn. Dutton's men use it for the North Patrol. Do not take it, they will notice it gone before the others. Take the 2 bays at the right of the post. Take a third if you can manage it. Hector looked at him with the expression of a man who has just received instructions slightly below his capability level. I will take what I can take. Go out the kitchen door and stay along the wall. 3 men in the yard, 1 at the front. The one at the front is the problem. Stay away from the front. I will stay away from the front. Hector moved to the kitchen door, cracked. It looked out with the unhurried precision of someone checking weather conditions and slipped outside with a quietness that was frankly surprising for a 67-year-old man in boots. Drift looked at Naya. She was already at the kitchen doorway looking toward the front of the house. Now, she said. They moved through the dark hallway with the particular care of 2 people who have in the space of a day and a half developed a working understanding of how the other moves. Drift led. Naya read the hallway behind them. They stopped once, pressing flat against the wall when the sound of boots crossed the far end of the hallway without pausing. 20 seconds. 30. The sound moved away. They went. The study was at the front of the house. This was the risk Drift had known about since the moment Dutton had confirmed the journal was there. The front of the house meant more men, more light, more likelihood of being heard. But Naya had been right. There was no version of walking out of Dutton's house without the journal that was worth walking out. Without it, they had Hector's 20-year-old contract, which was evidence of one fraudulent transaction. Significant, but singular. A corrupt clerk doing a corrupt thing once was an accusation. A corrupt sheriff doing corrupt things for 20 years as a pattern of behavior was a case. The study door was closed but not locked. Drift eased it open. The room was dim, only the ambient light from the window facing the porch and the sounds of the yardmen outside were closer here. They could hear one of them cough, could hear the creak of boot leather. Drift moved to the desk. 3 drawers. First one, papers, land documents, a ledger with columns of numbers that he did not have time to read, but that looked like the accounting of a man who had been acquiring property in a systematic way for a long time. Second drawer empty. Third drawer was locked. Drift examined the lock. A standard cabinet lock not built for serious security, built for the appearance of it. He took the belt knife he had taken from the guard and worked the tip into the gap beside the latch. Steady pressure, even, the same patience he used on frozen gate hinges in January when forcing it would only make it worse. The lock gave with a sound like a dry stick snapping. Too loud. Both of them went completely still. Nothing moved in the house. Drift reached into the drawer. His hand found the oilskin-wrapped journal immediately. He pulled it out, tucked it inside his vest, buttoned the coat over it, and looked at Naya. She nodded once. They moved back toward the hallway, and they were almost to the door when the light changed. Not a lamp. The front door opening, pushing a rectangle of moonlight across the floor, and in it stood a man. Not one of the yard men. The tall gunman. The one with the flat professional eyes. The one who had told Drift he did not fully understand what he was in the middle of. The one who had left the door unlocked. He was holding a lantern and his rifle, and he was looking directly at them, and for the length of a full breath all 3 of them were perfectly still, in the way that happens when a situation has moved faster than anyone's planned for it. His eyes went to the shape of the journal under Drift's coat. His jaw tightened. Then something else happened in his face. something that Drift had been watching for since the moment in the locked room when the man had said 3 years as if it were a sentence rather than a career. He did not raise the rifle. He stood there with it, and he looked at Drift, and he did not raise it. Drift said very quietly, "Don't." The tall gunman looked at him for one more second. Then he looked at the floor. Then he stepped aside. He stepped aside. Not theatrically, not with declaration, simply moved himself out of the doorway and looked at the wall and did not raise his rifle. Drift moved past him. Naya followed. They went through the front door and onto the porch and down the steps into the moonlit yard. From the left side of the barn, Hector Vela's voice came in a low, urgent hiss. "Here." He had 3 horses, 2 bays, and the gray that Drift did not recognize. He had also, as Drift had not specifically requested, but entirely should have expected, cut loose the 2 remaining horses at the far post and sent them south at a trot, which meant Dutton's men would be short on mounts when the alarm went up. "You said take 3 if I could manage," Hector said. He swung up with a stubbornness that overrode the stiffness in his joints. "I managed." They hit the saddles. The yard came alive behind them. Shouting boots on the porch, a rifle shot that went wide of everything. They rode north, and they rode hard, and the dark flat country opened ahead of them, and the sound of pursuit behind them was the sound of men discovering that most of their horses were gone. They rode for an hour before slowing. The land had flattened out north of Dutton's property into the long, pale stretches of open ground that rolled toward the ridge, and there was no sound behind them now except the desert and the horses breathing. Hector pulled up at a place where the trail divided. "East Branch goes toward my property," he said. "North Branch goes toward the Territorial Road, and from the Territorial Road a man on a good horse can reach Fort Lowell in 2 days." Drift looked north. Then he looked at Naya. She was looking north too. Her face in the moonlight had the particular quality it got when she was doing arithmetic. "Dutton will send a wire to the Territorial office at first light," she said. "If we can reach the fort before that wire is acted on, we can put the journal and Hector's document and my testimony in front of the commanding officer before Dutton has had a chance to build his version of events." "He'll have men on the main road by morning," Drift said. "Yes." She looked at him. "There is another route, longer. Through the canyon, draws west of the ridge. My father used it." She paused. "It is 2 days if you know it well, 3 if you do not." "Do you know it?" "Yes." She paused. "But Dutton knows I know it. If he is smart enough to anticipate the canyon route, he will put men there. Then we move before he has time to organize." Drift looked at Hector. "You should go to your property. Get word to whoever in town you trust." Hector sat straight in the saddle and looked at him with the expression of a man who has just been told something that does not apply to him. "I am coming with you," he said. "Hector." "Drift." The old man's voice was patient and final in the way that old men's voices are when they have moved past the point of discussion. "I have been in this territory for 40 years. I have watched Dutton build what he built. I have watched him take my family's land and other men's land, and I have told myself it was not my fight because I did not have the weapons for it." He looked at the document case that Drift had tucked inside his own vest for safekeeping. "Now I have the weapons. I am not going home to wait and read about it later." Drift looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "North Branch," he said. "We stay off the main road." Naya turned her horse north without another word, and Drift followed, and Hector Vela came behind them at a pace that said he had made his decision and was not revisiting it, and the Arizona night closed around all 3 of them, vast and indifferent, and full of the particular silence that belongs to open country. In the small hours, the silence of a land that has seen everything and is not impressed by any of it. They rode. The ridge appeared on their left as a dark line against the stars, and somewhere in those rocks the gold sat in the earth, where Leonard Coldhaven had left it for 25 years, waiting without patience or impatience, simply waiting the way the earth waits for everything. Around the 2nd hour, when the sky was beginning to consider the idea of dawn without yet committing to it, Naya said without preamble, "The tall gunman." the one who stepped aside. "Yes," Drift said. "He left your door unlocked earlier." "I noticed that." She was quiet for a moment, thinking through it the way she thought through everything from the outside in. "He is not all the way in," she said. "No," Drift agreed. "He is not. That may matter." "It may," Drift said, "if it comes to a court." She looked at him in the gray pre-dawn light. Her face was exhausted and precise, the face of a woman who had been running the full shape of this situation through her mind since before it started, who had known from the moment her father died that surviving it was not the end she was working toward. "You are already thinking about the trial," he said. "I have been thinking about the trial since the morning I found my father." Her voice was very controlled. "That is the only ending that matters. Not escape, not survival. The ending where what my father built is recognized as real and legal and belonging to my people. Where Dutton answers for what he did in a room with a judge and witnesses and a record that cannot be changed afterward." She looked straight ahead at the dark country. "That is what my father believed in, the law. Not because it is perfect, because it is the only thing that outlasts the men who break it." Drift rode beside her and said nothing for a while. The horse's hooves were soft on the packed earth. The sky was moving from black toward something that was not quite dark blue. "Your father sent a letter to me," Drift said, "before he died. I don't know if it arrived yet. I don't know what it says." "I know what it says," Naya said quietly. "He told me he was sending it. He said he was writing to the man who had signed his name 8 years ago and probably forgotten he had done it." She paused. "He said that the right person to carry something forward is not always the person who chose the job. Sometimes it is the person who signed their name on a Tuesday afternoon and thought nothing more of it." Another pause. "He said he trusted your name on that paper more than he trusted most men's words to his face." Drift looked at the dark ridge. He thought about a Tuesday afternoon 8 years ago, a borrowed pen, a document he had not read carefully because it had not seemed to require careful reading. He thought about a man writing a letter in the last weeks of his life, trusting a stranger's signature more than most men's promises. He thought about Tommy's hat on the nail in the corner of the kitchen, about the things that wait for us that we do not know are waiting. "We need to get to that fort," he said. "Yes," Naya said. "Then let's stop talking and ride." She almost smiled. He caught the edge of it in the gray light there, and gone the expression of a woman who had not smiled in 4 days and was not entirely sure she remembered how, but who had just discovered that the mechanism still worked. They rode. The canyon entrance appeared ahead of them as the sky finally made up its mind about morning and the light came in low and orange across the red rock, and the three of them rode into it without slowing, because there was no time left for slowing, and the day was beginning, and the day had things in it that still needed deciding. Behind them in the direction of Dutton's property the first light was also arriving, falling on a yard with too few horses, and a study with a broken drawer lock, and a front door that had been opened from the inside by a man who had finally, after 3 years, made a choice he could live with. The canyon walls rose around them, and somewhere ahead, 2 days of hard riding away. Fort Lowell sat in the morning light, and the wire that Dutton would send had not been sent yet, and there was still time. There was still time. The canyon was the kind of place that made sound behave differently. Voices carried in ways they should not have, and silence fell in places where there should have been echo, and the walls of red rock rose on both sides close enough that a man riding through felt the weight of them, the way you feel the weight of a decision you have already made and cannot unmake. The trail was narrow, and the footing was uncertain, and the morning light came in at an angle that was more suggestion than illumination, falling on the upper reaches of the rock face, and leaving the floor of the canyon in a cooler, dimmer version of the day happening above. Naya rode at the front. She knew this trail. The way you know something learned in childhood, not consciously, not from a map, but from the body, from the feet that had walked it, and the eyes that had read its turns before they understood they were reading. She rode without hesitation and without hurry, which was a particular combination that Drift had come to recognize in her as the signature of someone who had learned that rushing produces errors, and errors in this kind of country produce consequences that outlast the moment that caused them. Hector rode behind Drift. The old man had not complained once since they left Dutton's yard. He rode with the upright, deliberate posture of a man refusing to let his body make his age visible, and he watched the canyon walls with the attention of someone who had spent 40 years in this territory and knew that the land had opinions about the people moving through it. They were 40 minutes into the canyon when Naya pulled up. Not gradually. Suddenly, one hand going to the reins without warning, her horse stopping with the abrupt compliance of an animal that had learned to trust its rider's instincts. Drift came up beside her. She was looking at the left wall of the canyon at a point maybe 30 feet up, where the rock face was marked with something that was not quite a shadow and not quite a stain, a different texture, a place where the surface had been disturbed by something that had no business being up there. "Someone has been here," she said. Her voice was low and completely even. "Look at the rock. Upper left where the crack runs down from the overhang." Drift looked. It took him a moment, but he saw it. A faint marking on the edge of the crack, a place where the rock was scoured clean in a narrow horizontal line, the kind of marking a rope makes when it has been used to lower a person down a vertical surface. "Rope burn," Naya said. "Someone descended that wall within the last day or two." Drift looked from the mark to the canyon floor below it, to the trail ahead, to the pale blue strip of sky above the walls. "They came through here before us," he said. "Yes." She looked at him. "Which means they are not behind us. They are ahead." She nodded once. Hector had come up alongside them. He looked at the mark on the wall without being told what he was looking at, spent a moment reading it, and said, "How far to the north end of this canyon?" 3 miles, Naya said. "And if men are waiting at the north end?" "Then we are in a box," she said. "Canyon walls on both sides, men at the exit, and whoever Dutton sends along the main road, eventually pushing from the south." The three of them sat their horses in the narrow morning light and looked at the problem. Drift turned it over with the methodical practicality of a man who has spent a life solving physical problems on land that did not cooperate. The options arranged themselves plainly. Go back and they met whatever Dutton organized on the main road, men who were rested and on fresh horses and had the advantage of knowing the territory in daylight. Go forward into whatever was waiting at the north exit, 2 men with rifles in a position that a child could hold against a column of cavalry. Or go up. He looked at the wall, steep but not vertical, cracked and layered in the way of sedimentary rock, which meant handholds existed even if they were not obvious. The rope burns on the crack were 30 feet up, which meant the descent from the top was achievable, which meant the ascent was achievable for someone who knew where to put their hands. He looked at Naya. She was already looking at the wall. "My father taught me this route," she said. "He also taught me that a trail is only a trail until you need it to be something else." She dismounted without further discussion. They tied the horses in a side notch in the canyon wall in shade with enough rope to move and enough grass growing in the rock cracks to keep them patient. Then they went to the base of the wall. Naya rewrapped the cloth on her left arm without being asked, pulling it tighter with her teeth, tucking the end under with the efficiency of someone solving a problem before it became one. Drift watched and said nothing. Then they went to the base of the wall. It was hard going from the first handhold. The rock was dry, which was good, and warm from the morning sun, which was less good, and the holds were small and spaced in ways that required commitment before you could confirm they would take your weight. Drift's hands found the pattern, slowly feeling for what the rock offered, rather than demanding what he wanted from it, the same patience he used when a section of fence needed repair, in a way that the fence itself had to suggest. Naya moved above him with a fluency that was something between skill and memory, her hands finding holds that were not visible from below her weight, shifting with the certainty of someone whose body had done this before. The mind was old enough to remember learning it. She did not narrate what she was doing. She simply did it, and when she reached a section that was difficult, she stopped and talked him through it in a voice that was low and steady and gave him something to focus on other than the drop below. Hector came last. Drift had expected to need to help. The old man had been ready for it, had planned the logistics of it during the climb. He had underestimated Hector Vela, which he realized was a recurring error in his understanding of that man. Hector climbed with a slowness that was not weakness, but economy, placing each hand and foot with the deliberateness of someone for whom falling was simply not an option he was entertaining, and he came over the rim breathing hard but upright, and he straightened immediately, and he looked at Drift with an expression that said clearly that no comment on the subject was necessary or welcome. They went flat on the rim and looked down into the canyon's north exit. Two men, both on horseback, positioned in the shade of the left wall where the canyon opened out, rifles across their saddles, eyes on the trail below. Their position was well chosen, exactly where someone with experience would put a man if they wanted to cover the exit and have the advantage of cover and elevation simultaneously. They were watching the canyon floor, watching for two people and an old man coming through on horseback at ground level. They were not watching the rim above them. Drift studied them for a long moment. The closer man was shifting his weight in the saddle with the small, involuntary movements of someone who has been waiting in one position for too long in the building heat. His attention had begun to drift, not dangerously, not enough to make him careless with something specific, but enough that the edge of his focus was soft. The farther man was more disciplined, stiller. His eyes moved in a regular pattern across the canyon floor. Drift looked at Naya beside him. She was already watching the farther man with the same careful inventory she brought to everything, cataloging what she saw without rushing to conclusions about what it meant. "I can get behind the near one," she said, her voice barely a thread of sound. "Come down the rim from the east side. They will not hear me if you are louder." Drift looked at the distance between their position and the east approach to the near man. Possible. Difficult. The kind of thing that was possible in the planning and required everything to go correctly in the execution. "Give me 4 minutes," she said. "Then give them something to look at. If they turn on you before I move, then move faster." She looked at him with those precise dark eyes. 4 minutes. She was moving before he could say anything else. Staying flat along the rim, moving away from him to the east, low and deliberate, making no more sound than the wind made on its own. He watched her go and thought about Leonard Coldhaven, who had taught this woman to count the men in a room before she needed to know the exits before she wanted them to climb the walls that other people only saw as walls. He counted 4 minutes against his heartbeat, not rushing the count, not dragging it. The particular rhythm of a man who has made peace with the fact that the next few seconds are going to be sharp and is not going to waste energy being afraid of them. Then he stood up on the rim. He put 2 rifle shots into the canyon wall above the men's heads 10 feet up, aiming for rock. Not men aiming for noise and debris and the specific chaos of horses reacting to sudden violence close to their ears. The horses screamed. Both men came up with their rifles, heads swiveling, eyes going to the rim, going to the west where the shots had come from, where Drift was now visible against the sky, standing in clear silhouette, giving them exactly what they needed to look at. And in that moment of complete redirected attention, Naya came down the east rim behind the near man. She was not loud. She was not slow. She came down the rock with the controlled speed of someone who has calculated the drop and committed to it, and she had the man off his horse and his rifle on the ground before he had finished the motion of turning to see what was behind him. She moved with an economy that was almost without drama, the way a person moves when they have stopped being afraid and started simply doing. The farther man wheeled his horse toward her. Drift put a shot into the man's rifle stock. Not an aimed shot so much as a committed one, a shot fired from a position of compromise toward a target that was moving, and it struck the stock and knocked the weapon sideways, and the man yanked his horse around and rode hard south back into the canyon, not looking back, not stopping. The near man was on the ground with Naya's knee on his back and his own rifle laid across his shoulders. He was young. Younger than either of them had expected, maybe 22, with the frightened and stubborn face of someone who had agreed to something that had expanded considerably beyond the original description. Drift came down the rim faster than was entirely safe and crossed to them. "How many men does Dutton have on this canyon route?" Drift said. The young man's jaw set. Naya pressed the rifle down slightly. Not hard, just enough. She did not say please, and she did not raise her voice. She simply waited with the flat, patient certainty of someone who has moved past the point of asking. 4, the young man said. 2 here, 2 more at the ridge crossing. Drift looked at Naya. 4 that we know of, she said, plus the one who just rode south to report. Which meant Dutton would know the canyon approach had failed within the hour. Which meant the 2 men at the ridge crossing would be warned and reinforced before Drift and Naya reached them. The window was not closing. It had almost closed. The young man on the ground said something that stopped both of them. Cole told him not to send men into the canyon. Drift and Naya both went still. Cole, Drift said. The tall one. He told Dutton this was federal treaty land. Said if anything went wrong up here, Dutton would have the army on him, not just the territorial office. The young man looked up at them from the ground. Dutton sent us anyway. Said Cole was going soft. A pause. Cole rode out this morning, before sunup. Didn't say where he was going, just saddled up and left. Drift straightened up. Cole riding out on his own the morning after he had stepped aside in the study doorway. The morning after he had unlocked a door he was supposed to leave locked. A man who had told Drift he had been watching for 3 years and did not fully understand what he was in the middle of. That was not a man going soft. That was a man who had found the door and was walking through it. He looked at Naya. She was looking at him with the expression she got when she had already arrived at a conclusion and was waiting to see if he would get there. Tie him, Drift said. Loose enough that he gets free by tonight. They left the young man in the shade of the canyon wall with enough slack in the rope to work through in a few hours, took the better horse and rode north toward the ridge crossing with the particular urgency of people who know that the clock has become the most important factor in everything. Hector, who had descended the canyon wall without comment and retrieved the horses with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a man running an errand, fell in beside Drift as they rode. The tall one, Hector said. He rode out this morning. Yes. Where do you think he went? Same place we are going, Drift said. But he is going as a witness. Hector was quiet for a moment, thinking that through. That changes the arithmetic, he said. Considerably. Drift agreed. They rode. The ridge crossing was 3 miles north of the canyon exit, and it was exactly as bad as Drift had known it would be. 2 men positioned at the gap in the rock where the trail narrowed to pass through, one high on the left face, one lower on the right, the kind of placement that covered every approach at ground level, with no blind spots and no angle from which a rider could advance without being visible from both positions simultaneously. It was a simple setup, and it was effective, and the only thing wrong with it was that the men who had set it up had been waiting in the heat for several hours, and the heat in Arizona in July does things to a man's attention that no amount of discipline fully counteracts. Drift and Naya stopped their horses 200 yards short and looked at the problem. We cannot go through, she said. No. Going around adds 4 hours. Yes. Cole may already be at the fort. She was looking at the gap, reading it the way she read everything. Or he may not be. We do not know. We do not know, Drift agreed. But we act as if he is not, because if we assume he has handled it and we are wrong, we have lost everything. She nodded. He looked at the higher man, the one on the left face, wedged into a position in the rock that gave him shade and cover and a clean sight line down the entire approach. His rifle was resting across his knees. He was not moving, which meant either he was exceptionally disciplined or he was sleeping in a way that would not be obvious until someone tested it. The lower man was shifting. Small movements, the kind that accumulate when a person has been in one position too long and the body begins to negotiate. Drift looked at the terrain above the crossing. The rim above the men was accessible from the east. If you went back to the canyon entrance and climbed out at a different point, came around the top of the ridge and came in above them from behind. A long route. A quiet route. He dismounted and handed his reins to Naya. She looked at him. I am going to walk up to them, he said. That is not a plan. I am going to walk up to them alone. No rifle hands visible slow. They have orders to stop 2 riders. One man on foot coming in easy is a different situation. It gives them something to decide instead of something to react to. She stared at him with the expression of a person encountering a proposal that is technically possible but requires the universe to cooperate in ways it does not typically cooperate. "While they are deciding," he continued, "you take the horses east along the base of the ridge. I saw a draw about 150 yards back. Follow it up. It will bring you out above the crossing." "Above the men," she said. "Yes." "With no cover?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment that contained a great deal that neither of them said out loud. 10 minutes, she said. "Then I come over the top." 10 minutes. He held her eyes. "And if it goes wrong before you get there, the journal is in my vest, and you take it, and you ride for the fort, and you do not look back. That is not a suggestion." Her jaw tightened in the way that meant she wanted to argue, and had calculated that arguing was not the best use of the time available. 10 minutes, she said again. He handed her the Winchester and kept the belt knife and the sidearm from the guard, and he walked toward the crossing with his hands visible at his sides, and his hat pushed back so they could see his face clearly and know he was not trying to hide anything. The lower man called out when Drift was 50 yards out. "Stop there!" Drift stopped. He raised his hands to shoulder height, slow and deliberate, the universal language of someone who is communicating clearly that they are not a problem. "I am looking for Sheriff Dutton's men," Drift called. His voice was easy measured loud enough to carry to both positions. "I have information about the woman. She split off from me 2 hours ago heading east. I want to talk terms." Silence. The two men were reading him, reading each other. He could see the lower man's body language shift slightly, the small reorientation of someone processing new information that does not match their instructions. "You are Calloway," the lower man said. "That is right. Dutton wants you in custody." "I know it. That is why I am walking in with my hands up instead of running." He kept his voice conversational, the way you talk to a horse you are trying not to spook. "But before you take me in, hear what I said. She went east. If she reaches the relay station before your people do, the whole situation changes for everyone. You want to be the man who let that happen because you were managing me." The lower man took a step toward him. Drift watched the man's eyes, and the man was watching Drift, and neither of them was watching the ridge line above. "Come forward," the lower man said. "Slow." Drift came forward. 20 yards, 15, 10. He was watching the lower man, and the lower man was watching him, and the higher man's rifle had shifted to track Drift, completely focused entirely on this person walking toward them with his hands up, which was exactly what Drift needed it to be doing. He heard it before he saw it. A sound so small that it was almost not a sound, the single unavoidable contact of a boot with loose rock that a person makes when they are moving as quietly as possible and the terrain does not entirely cooperate. The lower man's eyes flicked upward. Drift closed the last 10 yards in 3 steps and hit the man with his shoulder, and they went down hard, and the rifle clattered sideways on the rock, and above them on the ridge, Naya's voice came down sharp and flat, and containing no room for interpretation. "Put it down!" The higher man froze with his rifle half raised, looking up at the figure standing above him on the rim, silhouetted against the sky with a Winchester leveled at a distance that did not require precision. "Now," she said. He put it down. Drift held the lower man on the ground with one hand on his wrist and caught his breath and looked up at Naya on the rim. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing necessary to say. They did not tie these two. No time, and the young man in the canyon would have his ropes loose by midday, and Dutton would know both the canyon and the crossing had failed within hours of each other, and the window that remained was measured not in hours, but in the distance between their current position and the fort. They took the lower man's horse fresh and rested and with better legs than anything they had been riding, and they pushed north hard, the 3 of them changing to the faster animal without slowing, because time was the only thing between them and the worst version of how the day ended, and they all 3 knew it. For a while none of them spoke. The land opened up north of the ridge into the long, flat stretches that roll toward the fort, dry creek beds crossing every few miles, the ground pale and cracked from 3 years of drought, the occasional stand of mesquite offering shade that nothing was currently using. The sun was high, and the heat was the serious, committed heat of Arizona midday, the kind that does not negotiate. Then Naya said without preamble, "The treaty copy." "The one Dutton burned," Drift said. "Yes." She was looking straight ahead. "My father made copies." Drift looked at her. "7 years ago," she said, "when Dutton first began making inquiries about Broken Ridge, my father had the treaty copied. Twice. He had a man who could read and write both English and the territorial legal language, a man who had helped with the original agreement. They made 2 copies of the full document, witnessed and signed." Her voice was careful, and even the voice of someone reciting something they have held for a long time and are now placing into the world with deliberate precision. "1 copy remained with the band. I do not know if Dutton's men found it when they went through the camp. It may be gone." "And the second," Drift said. She glanced at him. "My father sent documents to a lawyer in Tucson 8 months ago when Dutton stopped making offers and started making statements. He did not tell me the man's name. He said only that if something happened to him, the lawyer would know what to do." She paused. "I do not know if the man received them. I do not know if he acted on them. I only know my father trusted him enough to send them." Drift stared at her. "You have known this since the beginning," he said. "Since the beginning," she said. "Knowing it and being able to use it are different things. A copy in a lawyer's office in Tucson means nothing if Dutton controls the county office and the territorial commission, and the only people willing to speak are people he can reach." She looked at him steadily. "It means everything if we reach the fort first and put it in front of a federal officer, along with the journal and Hector's document and the testimony of people Dutton cannot touch." The implications settled over Drift all at once. Dutton had built everything on the assumption that the treaty was gone. He had been wrong about that for 8 months and had not known it. "Why did you not tell me this earlier?" Drift said. "Because I did not know if I could trust you earlier." She said it without apology, without deflection. "I know now." Drift thought about that for a moment, thought about what it had cost her to carry it alone to walk into Dutton's house to protect Hector with one hand and keep this card unplayed with the other. Thought about a woman who had been taught by her father to hold the most important thing in reserve until the moment when holding it served something larger than safety. "Pruitt," he said, "if the fort wires Tucson. If Pruitt responds. If the copy is verified. If it reaches the territorial court before Dutton's political connections can complicate the filing." She paused. "It is not certain. Nothing about this is certain. But it is real, and it is there, and it changes what we are walking into that fort to say." Hector had been listening to all of this without speaking. He rode on Drift's right with his characteristic stillness, and when Naya finished, he said, "Leonard Coldhaven was a careful man." "Yes," Naya said. "He thought about the long way around." He always thought about the long way around. Something in her voice shifted slightly, a quality that was not quite grief and not quite pride, but contained elements of both. "He said the shortest path between 2 points is the one your enemy expects you to take." They rode faster. The fort was visible in the distance when the riders appeared behind them. Not Dutton's hired men, 6 riders coming hard from the southeast on a line that cut diagonally across the flat ground ahead of them. Fresh horses organized riding with the kind of directional certainty that meant they had known where to position themselves before sunrise. Drift looked back at them and forward at the fort and did the arithmetic quickly. 4 hours at this pace. The riders behind were fresh, and they were eating the distance with the efficiency of horses that had not been running for 2 days through canyon country. The arithmetic was not generous. "He anticipated the canyon failing," Naya said. She was doing the same calculation. "He had a second group out before we left his property." "He is smarter than his operation suggests," Drift said. "He has been doing this for 20 years. He is very smart." She looked at him. How much time do we have? Less than 2 hours before they close the distance. She looked north, looked south, looked at the flat ground that offered nothing, no terrain advantage, no cover, nowhere to make a stand that would not simply delay the inevitable. Then she said, "There is a Butterfield relay station, 1 hour northeast. Stone building, 2 men, fresh horses." Drift looked at her. "My father stopped there twice over the years. He said the station master was an honest man." She held his eyes. "His name is Emmett Cross. My father said he was the only man between here and Tucson he would sit down and eat a meal with without wondering about the knife." Drift thought about it for the space of 3 strides of the horse. "Northeast," he said. They changed course. Emmett Cross was 60 years old and built like a man who had spent his life lifting heavy things and had no plans to stop. He was standing in the doorway of the relay station with a shotgun across his arms when they rode in hard and pulled up in the dust, and he looked at them with the steady appraisal of a man who had seen enough hard-ridden people arrive at his door to know the difference between trouble following someone and trouble they had made for themselves. Drift did not slow to a stop. He pulled up hard and said immediately, "6 riders behind us, Dutton's men. We need 10 minutes and fresh horses if you have them." Cross looked at him. Then he looked at Naya. His expression changed in a way that was not dramatic, but was complete, like a door opening. "You are Leonard's daughter," he said. "Yes," she said. Cross looked at the horizon behind them, back at her, and his face settled into something that was both simpler and more decided than it had been a moment before. He lowered the shotgun. "Get inside," he said. What happened next was the work of a man who had been at this station for 15 years and knew exactly what he could do with the land and the horses and the particular layout of a relay station that sat on federal ground. When Dutton's 6 riders came into the yard at a hard gallop 15 minutes later, Cross was standing in the doorway with his shotgun and his younger assistant beside him with a rifle, and the station house door was closed, and the yard looked exactly as a relay station yard should look at midday, except for 2 sets of fresh hoof prints leading away to the northeast. Hoof prints that Cross had made himself with 2 relay horses, while Drift and Naya and Hector went through the station and out the back to the draw behind it. The lead rider, a broad man with a red beard, pulled up and looked at the hoof prints and looked at Cross. "2 riders come through here." "Several riders come through here every day," Cross said. "It is a relay station." "In the last hour." Cross looked at the sky with the unhurried expression of a man for whom time was a professional consideration. "Hard to say precisely." The red-bearded man looked at Cross for a long moment. Then he looked at the hoof prints going northeast. Then he looked back. "You are obstructing county law." "I am standing on federal relay property," Cross said. "You want to talk about obstruction, get a federal warrant. Otherwise." He tilted the shotgun just enough, the gesture of a man who is not threatening so much as clarifying. "Get off my yard." They went northeast, following tracks that led into the salt flats and would lead them exactly nowhere for 4 or 5 hours. Cross came through the back 20 minutes later and found them in the draw and looked at Drift without much expression. "Tracks will dead-end them in the salt flats," he said. "Buy you 4 hours, maybe 5. He looked at Naya. "Your father moved a family through this station 6 years ago, a woman and 3 children caught between 2 militia groups. He moved them in the dark, fed them, horsed them, got them north." He paused. "He did not ask me first. He told me afterward, and he thanked me, and he said if I ever needed anything to tell him." His voice was even and without performance. "I reckon this is that." Naya looked at him for a moment. "Thank you." She said it slowly, with the weight of someone who has been waiting for the right moment to mean something completely. Cross shrugged it off the way men of that type shrug things off, the shrug of someone who does not need acknowledgement because the action itself was sufficient. He turned back toward the station and stopped. "Fresh horses at the post," he said. "2 of my best." He kept his back to them. "I will wire ahead to the fort from the relay line. Tell them you are coming and what you are bringing." He paused. "One more thing." He reached inside his coat and brought out a folded paper. "A man came through here 4 days ago heading south from the fort. He asked me if I had heard about Leonard Coldhaven. I said I had heard something. He left this. Said to give it to whoever came through next that looked like they might need it." Drift took the paper and unfolded it. It was a letter written on legal stationery from an attorney in Tucson named Miles Pruitt, addressed to the commanding officer of Fort Lowell, dated 12 days ago. It confirmed receipt of a treaty document sent by Leonard Coldhaven of the Coldhaven Band, confirmed the document's authentication against the original territorial records, and stated that a certified copy had been deposited with the Federal District Court in Tucson as a precautionary measure at Mr. Coldhaven's specific written request, and that Pruitt would appear in person to testify to the document's provenance at the court's request. Drift read it twice. Then he held it out to Naya. She took it and read it standing perfectly still. When she finished, she did not move for a moment. She folded it along its original creases with both hands carefully, as if the paper itself was something that needed to be handled correctly, and she held it against her chest. She looked at nothing in particular. The expression on her face was not triumph. It was something older and more complicated and more true than triumph. The look of a person whose father had turned out to have been right about everything, including the things she had hoped he was right about, but had not been certain of. "He sent it before I even knew Dutton was a real threat," she said quietly. 12 days ago. He was already 3 steps ahead." "He always knew," Drift said. "He always knew." Her voice was very controlled. "He said the law outlasts the men who break it. He said power used the right way is the only thing stronger than power used the wrong way." She stopped, steadied. "He was already fighting before they killed him. He had already placed everything where it needed to be." She looked at Drift, and her voice came out level and clear across the distance between them. "They killed him before he could see it work." Drift said nothing. There was nothing to say to that which would not take something away from it. He simply looked at her and let it be what it was. She straightened, put her hand over the letter once brief and deliberate. Then she looked at Drift with eyes that had moved past the grief into something on the other side of it, something clear and purposeful and ready. "Let us go," she said. They were 2 hours from the fort when Dutton himself appeared. Not his men. Dutton riding hard from the west on a line that cut across their path with the geometric precision of a man who had anticipated every route and put himself at the intersection. 2 riders with him, riding to intercept, not to pursue. He had been ahead of them, not behind, not following. Ahead, having ridden through the night to position himself at the one point where the routes converged. "Ride," Drift said. It became a flat race across open ground. Dutton's horses were fresh. Theirs had been running for 2 days with 1 rest stop, and the relay horses from Cross's station were good but not rested enough. The distance between the 2 groups was closing with a mathematics that did not favor them. Naya looked back, looked forward, made no sound. Hector was riding with the determined fury of a 67-year-old man who has waited 20 years for this particular moment and is not going to be denied it by the condition of his joints. Drift leaned low and counted the gap with his eyes and watched the angles, and then he saw it. One of the riders flanking Dutton was pulling back, not chasing, not falling behind from exhaustion, deliberately slowing, separating from the group with the clear intention of someone who has made a decision and is acting on it before he changes his mind. The tall gunman, Cole, peeling away from Dutton's side and turning his horse south, not toward the fort, not toward them. South, his own direction, his own road. Dutton saw it. Drift watched Dutton turn in his saddle and shout something and make a sharp commanding gesture that was readable from 100 yards. "Come back." Cole did not come back. He rode south at a steady pace, not hurrying, not looking back, with the quality of a man who has made his choice and is done with the part of his life that required reconsidering it. Dutton lost 2 seconds watching Cole go, and in a dead race, 2 seconds is not nothing, and Drift changed his angle, not away from Dutton but slightly toward him, cutting the line sharper, counterintuitive, the move of a man who understands that sometimes the only way through a closing gap is to commit to it before it closes completely. They went through. Dutton's horse was 3 lengths away when they crossed the line of intersection. Close enough that Drift heard Dutton shout, not words, just sound, the sound a man makes when the thing he has been chasing for 20 years of careful, patient construction turns and runs through his hands in a flat race across open ground. Drift did not look back. He rode. The fort gates were open. Cross's wire had arrived first. 2 soldiers were in the yard when Drift and Naya and Hector came in hard and pulled up, and a lieutenant was coming down the steps of the command building with his hat in his hand and the expression of a man who has received complicated news and is still working out the shape of it. Drift dismounted. His legs were not steady, and he did not pretend they were. Naya came down from her horse and straightened and looked at the lieutenant and spoke clearly in a voice that carried across the whole yard without effort, the voice of a woman who had been preparing this particular sentence for a long time. "My name is Naya Coldhaven. My father was Leonard Coldhaven, who led the Coldhaven Band north of Broken Ridge for 25 years. He was murdered 4 days ago by or at the direction of Sheriff Vance Dutton of Tucson County. I have evidence. I have witnesses. I have a letter from a Tucson attorney confirming the existence and authentication of a territorial treaty that Sheriff Dutton believed he had destroyed." She paused for exactly the right length of time. "I would like to speak to your commanding officer." The yard was quiet for a moment. The lieutenant looked at her. Then he looked at Drift. Then he looked at Hector, who sat his horse with the uprightness of a man who has arrived somewhere he has been trying to get to for 20 years. "You with her?" the lieutenant said to Drift. "Yes," Drift said. The lieutenant put his hat on. "Come with me," he said. Behind them outside the gate, hoofbeats were slowing. Dutton had ridden in after them because Dutton was the kind of man who had never been in a room where he was not the most powerful person, and old habits of that kind do not break easily, even when the evidence against them is arriving on horseback from 3 directions at once. He came through the gate with his one remaining rider and pulled up in the yard and looked at Drift and Naya walking toward the command building and looked at the soldiers, and something in his face changed. Not fear, not defeat. Something more interior than either. The expression of a man who has been building something for 20 years and is watching the foundation give way in real time and finding that he does not have a version of events that covers this. "Lieutenant," Dutton said. His voice was steady, political, the practiced authority of a man who has spent 2 decades being the most powerful voice in any room he entered. "I am Sheriff Vance Dutton of Tucson County. These individuals are fugitives in a murder investigation. I have the legal authority to take them into custody." The lieutenant turned. His voice was perfectly polite and absolutely final. "Sheriff, you are welcome to wait in the yard. The commanding officer will speak with everyone in due course." He paused. "After he speaks with Miss Coldhaven." Dutton stared at him. The lieutenant turned back toward the building and continued walking. Drift caught Naya's eye as they went up the steps. Her face was still controlled, still precise, still carrying everything it had been carrying for 4 days without putting any of it down. But her eyes, just for a moment, just for one unguarded second, held something that was neither grief nor calculation. Something bright and uncontained that had nowhere else to go. And it had worked. All of it. Every quiet decision her father had made in the years before they killed him was still standing, still, holding weight, still mattering in a way that Dutton had never anticipated because Dutton had never believed a man like Leonard Coldhaven would be believed. Drift held the door open. She walked through it, and behind them in the yard of Fort Lowell on a July afternoon in 1883, Vance Dutton stood in the sun with nowhere to go and nothing left to control, and the soldiers watched him with the patient, neutral attention of men who have been told to watch and are watching. And the fort went about its business around him, indifferent to his presence in the way that institutions are indifferent to the men who believed they could outlast them. The commanding officer was a man named Colonel Samuel Prudhoe, small and precise with the stillness of someone accustomed to making decisions that other people had to live with. He did not perform. He did not pace. He sat behind his desk with Leonard Coldhaven's journal open in front of him and Pruitt's letter beside it, and he read both without speaking. And the silence in that room was the best silence Drift had experienced in 4 days, because it was the silence of a man taking something seriously. He read. He closed the journal. He looked at Naya. He asked questions. She answered them without hesitation, without embellishment, with the spare precision of someone who has been organizing these facts in order of importance since the morning she found her father, and knows exactly which ones matter and which ones are decoration. When she finished, Prudhoe looked at the letter, then at her. He picked up his pen. "Corporal," he said without raising his voice. The door opened. "Send word to the Federal Marshal's office in Tucson." Not the county office. The Federal Marshal. He dipped the pen. "Tell them I have a formal complaint regarding the conduct of Tucson County Sheriff Vance Dutton, and I require their presence at this post within 48 hours. He paused. "And inform Sheriff Dutton that he is not under arrest and is free to leave at any time, but that if he does leave, the Federal Marshal will be looking for him in Tucson." "Yes, sir." The door closed. Prudhoe looked at Drift. "You transported the journal from the Apache camp." "Yes, sir." "Technically, that constitutes removal of evidence from a location that may be considered a federal investigation site." "Technically." Drift said it was the only way that evidence did not end up in Dutton's fireplace. Something moved in Prudhoe's expression. Not quite a smile. The acknowledgement of something that deserved acknowledgement. "Technically," Prudhoe said, "I am going to attribute the journal's chain of custody to Miss Coldhaven, as it was her father's property." He went back to writing. "You will both provide formal statements in the morning. In the meantime, get some food and rest." He said it with the finality of a man who has looked at the shape of a thing and made his decision and is not revisiting it before morning. Cole arrived at the fort 3 hours after dark. He came in alone, riding slow, and he surrendered his weapon at the gate without being asked, which told the gate guard something specific, and the guard sent word to Prudhoe, and Prudhoe was in his office when Cole walked in and sat down and said, "I want to make a statement." Drift heard about it the next morning from the soldier who brought their breakfast. Cole had talked for 4 hours. He had been with Dutton for 3 years. He had watched it become something he had not signed on for in the gradual way that things become something else when you make small compromises and do not notice the direction of travel until you are somewhere you did not intend to be. He had not killed Leonard Coldhaven. He had known it was coming and had not stopped it, which was its own accounting. He had been present when the territorial treaty copy was burned. He had helped construct the case against Naya. He had hesitated in the study doorway because he had already decided at that point that he was done. He had needed one more moment to be sure. He had left Dutton's group during the final chase because the moment had arrived. Drift sat with his coffee and thought about 3 years of watching and the particular weight of complicity and what it costs a man to find the door out when he has been standing inside for longer than he should have. Cole was not a good man in the simple sense. He had done damage. People had been hurt by things he had participated in, but he had found the door and walked through it, and in Drift's experience that was worth something. Not everything, but something. The Federal Marshal arrived the following afternoon. He was a lean, careful man who asked precise questions and wrote everything in a small notebook. He spoke with Prudhoe for an hour. He spoke with Cole for 2 hours. He spoke with Naya for 3. He spoke with Drift for 40 minutes. At the end of it, he closed his notebook and said, "Dutton left the fort yesterday morning. He will be in Tucson by now. He has political relationships there." He paused. "They will not be enough. The Federal Marshal's office operates at a different level than his relationships. He has always misunderstood that distinction." Dutton was arrested in Tucson 8 days later, taken from his office on a Thursday morning with 2 deputies present and no advance notice, the way federal arrests happen when the arresting party is not interested in giving anyone time to make arrangements. 4 charges: murder in the first degree, destruction of federal documents, conspiracy to defraud the Territorial Land Office, obstruction of federal treaty enforcement. The third man, the one Cole had named as the direct instrument of Leonard Coldhaven's death, was picked up the same morning at a ranch outside Tucson, where he had been staying since the night it happened. Drift heard about it from Hector, who had heard it from a rider out of Tucson, who had stopped at Hector's property with news the way riders do in country, where news travels slowly and is valued when it arrives. Hector came out to the ranch on a Thursday evening and sat at the kitchen table and told it straight through without embellishment. When he finished, Drift sat with it for a moment. "Good," he said. Hector looked at him. "That is all you have?" "That is what it is. What else would you want me to say?" Hector finished his coffee and stood to leave, and at the door he turned. "The land claim," he said. "The territorial court is reviewing it. With Pruitt's authenticated copy and the journal and Dutton's arrest, the filing he intended to make is legally void. It will take time. Courts take time. But the land is stayed." He looked at Drift with the eyes of a man who has been waiting for something for 20 years and is now processing what it feels like to have arrived. Leonard Coldhaven's work is going to stand. He was quiet for a moment. "The federal court in Tucson has accepted my contract into evidence as well. The Vela land case will take another year, maybe 2. Courts take time." He looked at his hands on the table, then back at Drift. "But it has a docket number now. It has a judge assigned. For 20 years it had nothing. Now it has something." He put his hat on. "She is coming back," he said. "In case you were wondering, she told me to tell you that." He opened the door. "Also, your south fence line still needs work." He left. Drift sat alone in the kitchen in the quiet of a summer evening, the light going orange through the west window, the sound of the land settling into night outside. He looked at the corner of the room. Tommy's hat was on the nail where it had always been. He looked at it for a long time. Then he got up and walked over to it. He took it down from the nail and held it in both hands, the small weight of it, the dented crown, the familiar smell of dust and a child, and the particular grief of things that cannot be undone. He stood there with it for a while. Then he walked to the shelf above the stove, the shelf where Margaret had kept her good plates, and he set the hat there. Not in the corner where it had been a wound. In a place where it was simply present, where he could see it and it would be there and it would be part of the house and the house would go on around it, and that was enough. He went back to the table and sat down. She came back 6 weeks later. He did not know she was coming. He was on the south fence line with a post driver in his hand, the morning calm and not yet hot, the sky still pale at the edges, the land smelling of the rain that had finally come 2 weeks ago, the first real rain in 3 years, slow and thorough, soaking into the cracked red earth with the patience of water that has been waiting. He heard the horse and turned. Naya was riding up along the property edge on a good bay horse he had not seen before, sitting straight, wearing different clothes than the last time he had seen her, her hair back, her eyes clear. She pulled up when she reached him. She looked at the fence post, then at him. "Still working on this," she said. "Getting there." "Took you long enough." "Had other things to deal with." She dismounted and tied the horse to the fence post and looked at the property around her with the same careful attention she had always brought to looking at things, not the inventory of someone checking for threats, but the attention of someone deciding what something is to them. "The trial date is set," she said. 4 months from now. Pruitt says the case is as solid as he has seen. Cole is cooperating fully. Running Bear and 2 others from the band have given depositions." She paused. "The land claim is stayed pending the court's review. Aldrich, the federal court officer in Tucson, says the authenticated copy and the journal together are sufficient to establish the treaty's validity. The filing Dutton made is void." She looked at him steadily. "My father's work is going to hold." "I know," Drift said. "I heard." "You heard, and you did not send word." "Didn't know what to say." She was quiet for a moment. "I went back to the band," she said. "For 3 weeks. It was necessary. It was the right thing. Running Bear asked me to take my father's place to lead." She looked at the ridge in the distance. "I said no." Drift looked at her. "Why?" "Because the band needs someone whose mind is there every day. someone for whom that is the whole of their purpose. She met his eyes directly. My mind is not entirely there anymore, not since a rancher with a post driver and a spare horse decided it was his business. She said it plainly without decoration, the way she said everything true. Running Bear understood, she continued. He said my father would have understood. He said my father told him once that the hardest thing about leading people is knowing when to pass it forward, that holding on too long is its own kind of failure. Drift set the post driver down in the dirt. What do you want? He said. Not what comes next, not what are you going to do. What do you want? She looked at him for a long time, not with the calculating look she had worn through all of it, not the look that was always reading the room and counting the exits. Something different. The look of a person standing in a place they have decided to stop moving through and simply be in. I want to stay, she said. For a while. If that is something you would want. Drift looked at her. He thought about 4 years of mornings that were the same morning about the hat in the corner of the kitchen about a 9-year-old boy who had climbed a keg roof to help a stuck cat, and the man who had not fixed the roof in time and had been serving the sentence for it ever since. He thought about a dead man who had remembered his name when he had forgotten it himself. He thought about the moment she had walked toward him out of the dust with her bare feet torn and her eyes clear, and something had shifted in him that had not shifted in 4 years, some counterweight moving, some door that had been closed, opening just enough to let the air in. It is not something I would allow, he said. She blinked. It is something I would want, he said. There is a difference. Something changed in her face. The last of the careful, stripped-down expression giving way to something more unguarded, something that had been there all along underneath the counting and the calculating and the steadiness, something that looked like relief and something that looked like arriving. She looked at the fence. This post is still not set right, she said. I know. You need to reset the base. The ground is too soft here from the rain. You have to go deeper. Show me, he said. She picked up the post driver. He crouched at the base of the post. They worked together in the morning light, and the post went in straight and solid, and the fence held, and the rain-softened earth took the post, the way good earth takes things that are put into it correctly, firmly, without resistance. When they were done, they stood back and looked at it. The sky to the west was moving building again, the slow architecture of another storm coming in off the Pacific, the second rain of the season. The light was doing what Arizona light does in late summer when the rains have finally come, going gold and generous and unhurried across everything as if it has all the time in the world. My father was right, Naya said. She was not looking at the fence. She was looking at the ridge, about the courts, about the law, about all of it. He was, Drift said. He never got to see it. No. She was quiet. He was quiet. The kind of quiet that had stopped being empty. He would have liked you, she said finally. He would have said you are a man who understands that doing the right thing and doing the easy thing are almost never the same thing. She looked at him. He did not say that about many people. Drift did not answer. There was no good answer, and he knew it. But something in the space between them had changed quietly, and without announcement, the way things change when two people have stopped being strangers and have not yet decided what they are instead, and have decided that they do not need to decide today. The storm was building to the west, slow and certain. Drift Calloway had spent 4 years in the dry season. He looked at the sky and thought that the rain, when it came, did not announce itself. It did not ask permission. It simply arrived, and the earth which had been waiting received it. He picked up the post driver and carried it back toward the barn. Naya walked beside him. The first drops came before they reached the door, large and slow, the way the first drops always come, each one dark against the pale dry ground, and the smell of wet earth rose up around them, and the sky opened and it rained.